a surprise for Grumpy. One cold, frosty January morning, Grumpy trudged down the creaky stairs, his footsteps heavy with irritation. Outside, the trees sparkled with frost, and the crisp winter air hung over the forest. Inside the cozy cottage, however, the fire crackled merrily, and the smell of porridge and toasted bread filled the air. But no amount of warmth or cheer could lift Grumpy's sour mood that morning. "Good morning, Grumpy," smiled Snow White as she placed a plate of warm toast on the table. Her voice was cheerful and melodic. "Good morning, Grumpy," echoed the 6 dwarfs, their greetings overlapping in a chorus. "There's nothing good about it," snapped Grumpy, glaring at everyone around the table. His face was set in a scowl, and his thick beard bristled as though sharing his foul mood. Happy, always eager to make peace, spooned a big helping of steaming porridge into Grumpy's bowl. "Here you go, Grumpy," he said with a bright grin. Grumpy looked at the bowl suspiciously. He took a reluctant taste, his scowl deepening instantly. "You," he snorted loudly, pushing the bowl away so hard it nearly toppled over. "It's cold and soggy, it tastes like wet cotton wool." He folded his arms across his chest, his expression daring anyone to argue. Snow White, undeterred by his attitude, quickly stepped in with another offering. She placed a beautiful brown boiled egg in front of him, its shell gleaming from the heat. "Here you go, Grumpy, this will cheer you up." Grumpy grunted in response, picked up a knife, and sliced the top off the egg, with such ferocity that the cat flew across the table and hit Doc square on the nose. "Well, really," cried Doc indignantly, adjusting his glasses and wiping his nose with a napkin. Grumpy ignored him entirely and barked, "Pass the salt," to Sleepy, who was predictably dozing over his toast, his eyes barely open. "Huh, what?" mumbled Sleepy, startled awake by the loud demand. "The salt, and hurry," roared Grumpy, thumping the table with such force that all the spoons rattled on their saucers. Sleepy, still half asleep, fumbled for the small pot and passed it across the table. Grumpy snatched it impatiently and began shaking it over his egg. But instead of salt, a puff of fine, black powder erupted from the pot. "Achoo, achoo!" Sleepy's sneezes shook the room like thunderclaps. Grumpy, caught off guard, sneezed too, his irritation growing by the second. "Pepper!" Grumpy shouted angrily, his voice echoing. "It is pepper." He turned his glare on Sleepy. "You fool, you passed me the pepper." He shoved his egg aside with dramatic disgust. "I can't eat my egg now." Bashful, his cheeks turning pink, offered his own egg hesitantly. You can have mine, Grumpy." He murmured it, his voice barely above a whisper. "No," barked Grumpy. "You like your eggs runny, and I like mine hard-boiled." He stood up abruptly, his chair screeching against the wooden floor. "I suppose I must go to work without any breakfast." He stomped toward the door, his heavy boots clanking on the floorboards. With a loud bang, he slammed the door so hard that the clock fell off the wall with a crash. Dopey, frightened by the noise, scrambled under the table to hide. Snow White crouched down, her kind smile soothing. She gently coaxed him out. "Don't let Grumpy worrying you, Dopey dear," she said softly. "Even if he is grumpier than usual, I'm sure he'll feel better soon. He must have gotten out of bed on the wrong side this morning." The day dragged on, and by the time the dwarfs returned home from the diamond mine, the smell of Snow White's delicious supper greeted them at the door. Grumpy, though still his usual gruff self, seemed a little less irritated than he had been that morning. He ate without a single complaint, which the other dwarfs noted as a small miracle. The meal finished, the dwarfs, tired from a long day, made their way to bed. Snow White stayed downstairs, humming a cheerful tune as she washed the dishes. The cottage was peaceful and quiet until a sudden yell pierced the silence. A loud howl of rage followed. Snow White dropped her dishcloth and rushed upstairs, her heart racing. She burst into the dwarf's bedroom to find Grumpy hopping up and down in fury, pointing at his bed. "What's the matter, Grumpy?" she asked, her voice calm despite his tantrum. Grumpy gestured wildly at his bed. "Look at it. Someone moved it. It's pushed up against the wall. I can't get out on one side." His face turned red as he glared at the others. Who did this? The dwarfs looked at one another, startled. "I didn't," said Dog firmly. "Nor me," yawned Sleepy, rubbing his eyes. "Not me," muttered Sneezy, sniffling. "It certainly wasn't me," chuckled Happy, grinning as he leaned back against his pillow. "And I'd never dream of it," stammered Bashful, turning a deep shade of pink. All eyes turned to Dopey, who had pulled his hat down, low over his face. He tugged it further down, trying to hide, but the effort only made him look guiltier. "So it was you," growled Grumpy, pointing his finger accusingly. "Why did you do it?" Snow White stepped forward, her warm smile radiating understanding. "I think I know why," she said softly. Kneeling down, she gently pulled Dopey's cap up, so the others could see his bashful, nervous smile. "You see," Snow White began, "this morning I told Dopey that Grumpy was extra grumpy because he got out of bed on the wrong side. I think Dopey moved your bed, so that tomorrow morning you'll have to get out on the right side." She turned to Dopey with a kind smile. "Is that right, Dopey?" Dopey's face lit up with a bright, sunny grin. He nodded enthusiastically, his delight shining through his shy demeanor. The dwarfs all turned to Grumpy, waiting to see how he would respond. For a moment, he looked flustered. Then, clearing his throat, he muttered, "Aram, well, in that case, I suppose I'll forgive him this once." The other dwarfs broke into cheers, clapping Dopey on the back. Snow White smiled warmly, relieved to see the tension melt away. The next morning, when Grumpy woke up, he slid out of bed on the right side, as Dopey had arranged. Though he was no less grumpy than usual, he didn't slam the door or complain about breakfast. And for Grumpy, that was as close to cheerful as anyone could hope for.